Thank you. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia by way of Massachusetts, Mr. Connolly.
Thank you very much. Go Red Sox. And thank you all for being here today. And I agree with the gentleman who just asked his line of questions. We need to learn from history. But you don't learn from history by whitewashing it. Decisions and events that took place had history. They had context. They had antecedents. And some of my friends on the other side want to pretend history never existed. It all started when Kabul fell on someone else's watch. But that did not happen in a vacuum. And I might add, until that very day, my friends of the other side of the aisle were still trumpeting Donald Trump's peace agreement in Doha. In fact, let me quote from their webpage, which is behind me here. Trump has continued to take the lead in peace talks as he signed a historic peace agreement with the Taliban in Afghanistan, which would end America's longest war, end quote. You know when that came down? The day the Taliban marched into Kabul. They were proud of it. But today they want you to believe none of that happened. Joe Biden caused it all. Mr. Sopko, you and I have known each other a long time. And you know the respect I hold you in and the work you and your team have done, always thorough, not always well sung, not your fault. And I wish Congress had listened a lot earlier to some of the warning signals you sent us. But let me ask you, I'm not going to ask you who's at fault. I'm going to ask you some facts, though. You had a report, and I want to quote from your report. The U.S. decision to withdraw U.S. military and military contractors from Afghanistan through the February 2020 signing of the U.S. Taliban agreement under the Trump administration and the withdrawal following President Biden's public address in 2021 was a factor in the demoralization and ultimate, disintegration of the Afghan military and ultimately Afghan government. Is that a correct statement?
That is correct.
And let's go back to the decision led by then Ambassador Khalilzad. He was an ambassador, chief U.S. negotiator on behalf of our government under the Trump administration, and he led the U.S. side of the negotiations in Doha, correct?
That is correct.
And did he not bless a decision that was a State Department decision, I assume backed by the Pentagon at the time, to negotiate with the Taliban and not to invite the Afghan government itself in the preliminary negotiations?
That also is correct.
Now, let's stop there. That took place on Trump's watch entirely. What could possibly be the impact of actually not inviting the government we're allegedly fighting for and defending and equipping by telling them, we're going to negotiate with your armed, violent, terrorist, medieval opponents, the Taliban, without you at the table. We're going to cut our own deal with them, and you're going to have to live with it, whatever it is. I'm just spitballing here. Mr. Search, you're from the Pentagon. Could that have a demoralizing effect on any military?
Well, we didn't do any work on that, but I see your point, Congressman.
We did, Congressman, and we said it did have a debilitating effect upon the Afghan morale. And if you talk to any of the Afghans, they will tell you that.
Thank you, Mr. Sopko. I counted on that. Maybe the Pentagon could learn from the forthrightness we just heard. That's kind of common sense, Mr. Storch. And if you're advising another government and you withdraw support from that government in the form of who we're going to negotiate with, it has consequences. And by the way, did that agreement that was produced between us and the Taliban, did that lead to any release of prisoners?
Yes, I think we refer to as 5,000 Taliban were released. They agreed not to participate in fighting, but almost every one of them joined the fight against the Afghan government.
So it was kind of a fig leaf agreement, right? Like We agreed to it, we accepted it.
Yes, and it was
only-
forced upon the Afghan government.
And forced upon the Afghan government by whom?
I believe we found it was Secretary of State Pompeo.
Thank you, Mr. Sopko. I just think it's important as we're discussing lessons learned so that we don't repeat mistakes, we be honest about the history and the context that preceded dramatic events in August of 2021. I yield back.